VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you for joining us today here on Crosstalk on the VCY America Network. My name is Jim Schneider. 3 weeks away from the big election, the November 6th election, and there is growing concern regarding the integrity of the vote upcoming, growing concern regarding the matter of voter fraud, voter integrity, the matter of voter ID and the lawsuits and everything that's going against it. We're going to be discussing this aspect today here, especially as we focus in on the potential for voter fraud and voter ID related issues. Our guest is Robert Knight. He is a senior fellow and policy expert with the ACRU. That is the American Civil Rights Union. He's been a journalist for 15 years, including 7 as editor and writer for the Los Angeles Times. He holds a bachelor's in political science from American University, a master's in political science, and also a media fellowship. He's a media fellowship from Hoover and from Stanford. He's been had many senior positions with the Heritage Foundation, Family Research Council, Concerned Women for America, Media Research Center, and Coral Ridge Ministries. He's author of some 3 books and hundreds of reports, papers, and articles. Robert Knight, welcome back here to the program Crosstalk.
Hey, Jim. It's always a pleasure to be on Crosstalk.
Bob, are you concerned at all as to the integrity of the vote coming up for this November 6th election?
I'm extremely concerned because in a lot of areas we've seen close elections, and a little bit of vote fraud can swing it. And the classic example was Minnesota with Al Franken recounting and discovering ballots in car trunks and so on until they came up with 312 more votes than Norm Coleman, the incumbent senator. The thing I regret most is that Senator Coleman threw in the towel at that point and conceded the election. I don't think he should have because I think he clearly won it, and there was clear vote fraud. They found out later that more than 1,000 felons who weren't qualified to vote had voted in that election, so that more than made up. And they tend to vote Democratic, convicts. So, no, that was very serious. That was the 60th vote for Obamacare.
Wow.
And in other areas, you see similar things happening, but you see a number of states put photo ID laws into place. I think 9 of them will be in effect. Others put them into place only to see them struck down. South Carolina.
Yeah, well, I was shocked. What was it, last week when I heard that this panel of federal judges, they held up the constitutionality of the South Carolina photo ID law, but they're delaying its implementation until after the November election.
Yeah, they said there's no reason that it isn't constitutional. After all, it was modeled on Indiana's photo ID law, which was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court a couple of years ago, and there is no valid reason that the Justice Department stopped South Carolina's law. But they delayed the court decision just long enough to say, well, we wouldn't have time, or the South Carolina officials wouldn't have time to implement it properly, so therefore wait until after the election. Something similar happened in Pennsylvania, where a state judge struck down the Pennsylvania voting ID bill or law, and that was delayed and appealed, and the Supreme Court, a judge actually upheld it. It was appealed by the opponents of the law to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. They sent it back down to the judge, and he upheld the law while saying you can't implement it until after the election.
What gives? I mean,
frustrating.
Yeah.
Well, I think either they are partisan judges, or they are bending to the pressure from Democrats who say that any law that requires showing an ID works against minorities and young voters and the elderly. So therefore, it's a partisan act to make someone prove who they say they are when they show up to vote, which is nonsense.
Well, absolutely, and I'd like you to comment on this further because, if I want to go to the library and check out a book on Curious George and the Man with the Yellow Hat, guess what, Bob? I have to show a photo ID.
You do.
If I want to get rid of waste motor oil, at the city dump, I've got to show a photo ID to prove that I'm a resident. If I need to get some kind of certain kinds of cold medicine over the counter, Sudafed or something, I've got to show photo ID to the pharmacist so that I can obtain the medication.
Yeah, also signing for prescriptions. I've been asked for photo IDs. Look, this whole thing's premised on a faulty study by the Brennan Center at New York University. Brennan Center is a far-left think tank funded by George Soros, the far-left billionaire who funds much of the left, from the ACLU to Media Matters to all sorts of really far-left groups. They did a telephone survey of something like 900 people, and they asked really odd questions, and then they came up with this figure that 25% of African Americans of voting age lack a photo ID. Think about that for a minute. That means 1/4 of all black adults can't drive, can't buy a six-pack of beer, can't do the things you mentioned, getting prescriptions, etc. This doesn't pass the straight-face test.
Mm-hmm.
In South Carolina, they did a study because their law was under attack, and the DMV looked at they're in charge of monitoring who's on the voting rolls and who isn't, and whether people have moved and that sort of thing. And they did a study, and they found out that a tiny percentage, less than 1% of African-American voters lacked a photo ID. It's just not a problem.
And many of these state laws are making provisions then to provide a complementary photo ID in such cases. Some of the things I heard of, one report came to us of a family that was getting a state ID card for their 17-year-old, not able to drive due to different physical disabilities. But the DMV was encouraging them to check this box and you can get a free one, and to help them with voting, even though the child was just turning 17 years old, not even eligible to vote in the election. I mean, it's crazy to see the things that are going on.
Well, the states are bending over backwards to make sure people who might have difficulty obtaining an ID can get a free one from the state. I remember that the governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, when asked, won't this disenfranchise voters? She said, look, we're willing to drive them to to their precinct office or whatever to get the photo ID. I mean, we want to make sure everybody who is eligible to vote has the ID so they can vote. So it's not a matter of suppressing the vote. That's a false picture that I think is intended to whip up African Americans and make them feel as if they're being cheated. I mean, it's nasty race baiting, is what it is. It's unworthy of this country. It's unworthy of these leaders. The NAACP, which was once a great organization and now has descended into just straight left-wing politics, sent a delegation to Geneva, to the United Nations, and complained to the one of the councils there, tribunals, that the United States was depriving some of its citizens of human rights. Now, think about that for a minute. China, Cuba, a couple other nations that know a thing or two about suppressing the vote were on that council that they complained to. So it's patently absurd, and it's all intended to turn out the Democratic base and stir them up to make them feel as if somehow they're getting the wrong side of the end of the stick, and it's a pack of lies, to tell you the truth. I don't usually use language like that, Jim, but it really is.
Why the involvement of the U.S. Justice Department?
Well, because Eric Holder heads it, and he's a longtime crony of President Obama, and apparently he'll do anything to ensure his reelection. In 2008, the new Black Panther Party had a couple people in military fatigues and wielding batons, intimidating voters outside a Philadelphia polling place. They were convicted of voting intimidation, and the Justice Department refused to defend the conviction in court. They dropped the charges. This is the clearest case of outright voter intimidation we can remember since the bad old days, in the Deep South when blacks were discouraged from voting in a number of ways, from poll taxes to just sheer outright intimidation. This was clear in the daylight. It's caught on video. Fox News was running it, and yet they dropped the charges. Well, we hear from J. Christian Adams, who's a former attorney at the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, that they were told to ignore any complaints if they came from white Americans. Only follow up on complaints if they're turned in by minorities. That's racism, pure and simple. It means it's unequal treatment. That violates the Constitution. And Eric Holder is presiding over all this.
Just a couple hours ago, Bob, this headline appeared in the Milwaukee Journal's website, Florida Woman Sentenced for Wisconsin Election Fraud. And it's about a woman that was arrested in Florida, charged with forging signatures on nomination papers for a Democratic member of the Wisconsin Assembly. She registered to vote in Milwaukee by giving a Milwaukee address, even though she resided in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, then cast, the absentee ballot in Milwaukee while voting in Oshkosh as well. Are you concerned about people doing this double voting?
Well, yes, and that's why Chris Kobach, who is the Secretary of State in Kansas, was leading the 15-state project, and that was where states cooperated and did cross-checking of their voter rolls to make sure people weren't registered in more than one state. The Pew Center for Research came up with a figure that 1.8 million dead people are still on the voting rolls. The couple 100,000 people are registered in more than one state. Something like, what was it? I don't have the figures right in front of me, but an enormous number of people are registered in 3 states. So some groups have been trying to help officials out. True the Vote. It's a wonderful organization. Catherine Engelbrecht heads it. And if you go to their website, truethevote.org, you can actually see who's registered to vote in your area. And if you know they've moved away, then you can alert election authorities and say, hey, I don't think this is kosher here. And they can compare voter rolls. Anybody can do this. You can go to your local county or state election office and check on the voter rolls. You can make sure you're registered to vote, and that people you favor voting also are registered to vote. And by the way, Jim, that's the bigger message here. Fraud or no fraud, this election is going to turn on turnout, and whichever side gets the most people out there to vote is going to win. Mm-hmm. And I believe the left is leaving no stone unturned, including vote fraud, to try to ensure the re-election of President Obama. And the Republicans, if they want to elect Mitt Romney and Republican candidates, have got to be just as aggressive in getting the vote out.
I understand a new video has even surfaced of Obama campaign staffer assisting an undercover reporter with possibly voting in 2 states.
Yeah, that was James O'Keefe is at it again. He's the sting artist who brought down Acorn, where they were advising them on how to run a prostitution ring in several cities. And that brought down Acorn. Now they've refashioned themselves into other organizations, but it really broke their back, at least for a time. Anyway, he went in and with a video camera and.
Tell you what, we're pretty close to a break here. Yeah, and let's pick that up on the other side of the break. But folks, it's an amazing story. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, in the textbooks, it says that sickle cell anemia is a beneficial mutation. Is this true?
No, it's not, Chris. Sickle cell anemia is a genetic condition that is a very tragic condition. It's often fatal to the carrier, and even if not fatal, it's harmful and painful. The beneficial nature of it is due to the fact that those who happen to be carrying sickle cell anemia have a slightly higher chance of surviving malaria. But a fatal disease could not truly be helpful, certainly not in an evolutionary sense. Chris, this is the best example of a beneficial mutation. Evolution needs trillions of beneficial mutations, but has only 1 or 2 very questionable mutations they can point to. I think it shows best of all that evolution simply did not occur. Let's go back to Genesis and understand things correctly, even mutations.
For more information, visit us on the web at icr.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. With Election Day just 3 weeks away, we're talking about voter fraud today with Robert Knight, a senior fellow and policy expert with the ACRU. That's the American Civil Rights Union. And Bob, just before the break here, I had seen this video on your website. By the way, folks, check it out, protectyourvote.us, protectyourvote.us. But you had a link to a story about an Obama campaign staffer actually assisting an undercover reporter with voting in 2 states.
Yeah. This woman is with Organizing for America. That's President Obama's reelection outfit. And a woman came in and was joking with her about voting in 2 states. And she said, I just don't want to get in trouble, and you kind of have to see the video to believe it. She's aiding and abetting and laughing about it and assuring her if she does it right, she won't get caught, essentially. But there have been a number of sting videos that James O'Keefe of Project Veritas has done. The first one was in New Hampshire, where he and a number of other people went in and voted. They got the names of dead people, and they registered to vote. Or they walked in to vote, and they gave the names, and the people at the poll said, yeah, go ahead and vote, or handing him the ballot. He said, well, don't you want to see my ID? No ID is needed. Well, I'd feel better if I showed you some ID, and I have my wallet in the car. No, it's just not necessary. And they were adamant that they would vote without showing him any proof of who they were. Mm-hmm. And they were all representing people who shouldn't be voting. Then there was a video that O'Keefe did in North Carolina. It was at one of the colleges there, and he has an actual college official on record saying that thought it was funny that students could vote in 2 states. And that's a major problem, by the way, because students are registering where they are going to college, and then they vote by absentee ballot back in their own states. How do you cross-check that? It's kind of difficult. Mm-hmm. It's an offense. It's a crime to do that, but getting caught is the other thing. But I don't want people to get despondent over this. I think if there's enough alertness out there and we keep raising the issue, then that'll keep the vote fraud down. The most important thing is turnout, everybody getting out to vote for the candidate of their choice.
Let me, and we'll talk more here on the election as well, but Bob, this woman that I referred to earlier, that Florida woman sentenced for Wisconsin election fraud, she had served 16 days in jail for one count. The judge suspended a 6-month term for the second count with a year's probation, which he allowed to transfer to Florida, the probation, and prosecutors dropped 2 additional charges. Are you concerned that when voter fraud is actually found that courts are not getting tough on it?
Yeah, I am, because it's kind of a slap on the wrist thing. It's, there they go again. And it should be a crime because it's a crime against our self-governance. It says that somebody who's acting illegally can cancel your vote out. And people have fought and died for our right to vote, and that secures our freedom as a nation. And if we lose that, we end up as a banana republic. We don't want that. This Madison case is similar to the one that surfaced in the Indiana Supreme Court case, where that's a real eye-opener. I read the opinion where the Indiana photo ID law was upheld, and they found that there wasn't a single credible example of a person being denied the ability to vote because they lacked a photo ID. And of the people they raised to say, this person found it difficult to get a photo ID, one of them worked at the Division of Motor Vehicles where they could get one easily. Another was a woman who was registered to vote in Florida and even drove a car with Florida plates. And she'd registered also in Indiana, and they raised her as a victim of the system who couldn't vote. And one of the more prominent judges was laughing about it. Scalia, I think it was, saying, this is the best you can do. Get out of our courtroom.
Wow.
Come on.
Tell us about the Bridgeport, Connecticut Mayor Bill Finch. We understand he had
he
presided.
got caught on tape. Boy, video is a wonderful thing in this age of the Internet, where it can reveal things they'd rather not be revealed. He was campaigning for a fellow Democrat, Christopher Murphy, a Senate candidate, who's going up against Linda McMahon, the Republican. And he said that he guaranteed the crowd that you can be guaranteed you're going to get the vote. And he laughed that even if it takes a couple days to get the result. Bridgeport has a long history of vote fraud. So here he is basically laughing, saying we'll do whatever it takes to cinch this election. This is in a heavily urban city, and it's where these things characteristically happen. Of course, the best disinfectant is sunshine, and that means looking at things clearly and bringing them out into the open, like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's disconcerting, at the same time we're seeing things like this go on, we're finding delays in some states with the military ballots going out, and either not having sent them out on time or multiple days delay in getting them out, and there doesn't seem to be any concern, equal concern, with the disenfranchisement of military votes.
Well, it's even worse than that. In Ohio, they had a voter ID law, and they also had an absentee ballot law that said the military had 3 more days to vote by absentee ballot than the rest of the population, because it closes on Friday before the election. That would be in November. Would that be November 2nd, I guess? And the liberals took it to court, and the judge struck it down, saying that while it's good to give extra help to our military families who may find it more difficult to vote, you have made the case that everybody shouldn't be entitled to that right as well, so therefore we're going to turn the whole thing down.
Wow.
Which is real interesting reasoning.
What's your take on early voting?
I don't like it. I think it creates tremendous ease for vote fraud. A lot of states have just ways to apply for mailing voting early ballots, either in person or by mail. And there's something about everybody showing up on Election Day that's very American. Mm-hmm. It's that we take our freedoms that seriously, that we'll all set aside at least a half hour somehow in our busy day to go vote for the people who are going to be our lawmakers. And with the early voting, it just stretches everything out. And I think you can make provisions for people who are invalids, people who really will have difficulty voting, absentee voting for those who just won't be there, without creating all kinds of loopholes that allow people to commit fraud. I would get rid of most early voting, actually. However, that said, if your state does have early voting, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to go ahead and do it, to bank your vote, so to speak. If you think you're not going to be able to make it to the polls that day, or some people have raised the possibility that there might be some disruptions at the polls. I hope that's not the case. I think it'll be more a case of trying to stuff ballot boxes in heavily urban areas that aren't being watched very closely. Mm-hmm. They use all kinds of tricks. In St. Louis, and John Fund has chronicled this in his book Stealing Elections very well, they kept the polls open 3 hours later in heavily Democratic precincts. That's patently unconstitutional to say some voters have more hours to vote than others. They did all kinds of things. They allowed voters to vote without comparing signatures to make sure they were who they said they were. They found votes. It was really a mess. I think St. Louis has worked hard to clean up its act, but anything can happen.
How do we protect against voter fraud? How do we protect the integrity of the vote?
Well, as I said, you can go to truethevote.org, and that they're listed on our website under resources on the protectyourvote.us. That's an all-purpose site. Jim, for everybody, anything you want to know about voting, from efforts to prevent vote fraud to how you can vote in your state, how you can early vote, which states have it. I mean, it's all right there. We've got a map you can click on. We've got news and commentary on there, too. But True the Vote is engaged heavily in trying to enlist ordinary citizens to help them out by checking voter rolls and making sure there aren't duplications. The other thing would be to volunteer as a poll watcher. You don't have to do anything. You just you sign up with your party, whether it's Democrat or Republican or independent or libertarian or whatever, and you can sit behind the polls, and you can they actually give you a device so you can keep track of who's voted. You hear the name and you click on it, and then if you happen to hear the name twice, you know something funny's going on.
Again, folks, the website, write it down, check it out, protectyourvote.us, and they've got a lot of helpful information there, including an information sheet on protecting your vote, protectyourvote.us. And in addition there, you'll find the state-by-state information. You'll find a number of issues that are going on in the courts over this issue, but I think it's critically important. Bob, address your comments, if you would, for a moment, as to the person who says, I am just tired of this whole thing. I'm going to sit this one out. I'm not overwhelmed with either of the candidates running. I'm just tired of it, and I'm sitting out.
Well, that person better not complain about where the country's headed in the next few years if they decide not to vote. This is, people are around the world are in awe of our electoral system because, by and large, it's honest. On the whole, it's you feel like if you cast a vote, it's going to be honestly counted. Unlike many other countries, like say Venezuela,
yeah.
which just had a presidential election on October 6th. Even though exit polls by an independent firm showed that Hugo Chavez was losing pretty badly, he was announced the winner by, I think, 8 to 10 points. It helped that he corralled the airwaves. He'd shut down they'd seized 32 radio stations and shut down the opposition TV stations, and they allowed the opposition candidate to have 3 minutes of paid advertising all day. That's it. Whereas Chavez could go on anytime he wanted, and he tends to go on for hours. But as far as counting the vote, I mean, it's a mock election like occurred in communist countries and still occurs in places like Venezuela. We don't have that, but we have to be vigilant so it doesn't happen here. But to sit it out, I just find unconscionable. I remember, I think it was William F. Buckley who advised people who were disgusted with the process, find the most conservative candidate you can and then vote for him. It may not be perfect, but it is the lesser of two evils to many people, but it's still the lesser of two evils. Why would you want to sit back and watch something worse happen if you don't vote? So I would encourage everybody who's even sitting on the fence to get out and vote for whoever they want. If you like the way President Obama is leading the nation, then go ahead and vote for him. If you think Mitt Romney can do a better job, vote for him. I know how I feel, and I'm not endorsing anybody, but I would say that the person who most closely adheres to our Constitution and conservative principles of economics should be the person, and for religious freedom, and traditional values ought to be the one getting any Christian's vote.
We're going to take a quick break, and folks, let's open the phone lines. If you have questions you'd like to ask or comments here about voter integrity, voter fraud, voter ID, and related issues, the importance of this election, our number 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. We'll be right back.
Most people devote much time researching and investigating important issues before making a decision or reaching a conclusion. Yet when faced with the most important issue of their earthly life, where will I spend eternity, they appear to be unconcerned or disinterested. Since God does not promise anyone tomorrow, and man's eternal destiny is sealed at death, would it not be wise to investigate these things? That's the purpose of the book Preparing for Eternity, in which author Mike Gendron contrasts the truth of God's Word with the teachings and traditions he was taught for over 30 years in the Roman Catholic Church. He found that eternal life is not merited by good works, but is given freely by God's grace to those who put their faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ as their all-sufficient Savior. The book, Preparing for Eternity, is available for a donation of $17 or more to VCY America by calling 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Robert Knight is with us from the American Civil Rights Union. That's different than the ACLU. We're talking about the issues here pertaining to the upcoming election, voter fraud, voter ID, and the importance of getting out there and voting. We can so often sit back and complain, but how many times I have heard from people saying, I'm just going to sit this one out. Bob, I don't believe anybody can, because there is so much at stake in this upcoming election.
Yeah, and I think people listening now, knowing somebody like that, really need to persuade them that, hey, your vote does count. You're an American citizen. It's your duty to vote. No, it's not just a privilege, it's a duty, because we don't have a king here. We are the king. The people are we the people is how the Constitution opens. And if the people don't do their job, then we lose our self-governing republic. So it's very important. I will say that I think people shouldn't find it that difficult to decide how to vote. You know, with events that have unfolded over the last few years, with the Department of Health and Human Services ordering faith-based institutions to provide abortifacients and contraceptives, you know, if you like that, you can vote a liberal slate. If you don't like it, you can vote conservative. I would say that we're seeing an enormous amount of anti-Christian activity on the part of a growing government. And somebody's got to put a stop to that and turn it back. And I think that if you look at the respective parties, you look at individual candidates, check their record. You know, if they're supporting things that are patently wrong, and same-sex marriage is patently wrong. It's unbiblical. It's immoral. The state has no business putting incentives in the law for people to stay trapped in something that's wrong. It's not compassionate. Then vote accordingly.
You know, Bob, one of the websites that I've come across that I have really appreciated is votesmart.org. A nonpartisan website, but makes it very easy to find out candidates' positions on issues. They have a section on their site called Vote Easy, where it asks you the questions on where you stand on same-sex marriage, abortion, different things. And then as you click in your answers, the candidates emerge that reflect your viewpoints and done in a nonpartisan manner. And it's a very helpful site. That's votesmart.org. And on the left side of the page, they have a section called Vote Easy, and it'll ask any number of questions, not only on those issues, but also you'll find matters pertaining to defense, just any number of matters that are there, the healthcare matters, Afghanistan, the budget, the economy, energy issues, the environment, guns, you know, the whole kit and caboodle, and certainly is helpful for people to do that in a nonpartisan manner. Let's go to the lines. By the way, our number here to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. We're going to begin in Tennessee. Sean, you're on the air.
Well, I know what I'm about to say. A lot of people aren't going to agree with it, but I'm sorry I have to. Well, actually, I'm not. I have to be kind of the odd one out here, and I know I keep hearing this week after week, regenerating about voting for lesser two evils. I'm sorry, I cannot go along with that concept. To me, that's like asking me which latrine do I want to bob for apples out of. Sir, this country is under judgment. We're going to have to face what's coming to us. We have sinned beyond redemption. Obama is in office, believe it or not, when you think about it, for our judgment.
Your response here, Bob?
Why would you want to bring persecution on your children? I don't see this as a positive response to, if you really abhor the policies of President Obama, and whoever else is in office you don't like, why would you sit back and say, "Yep, God's slapping us around. Let's bring it on. Let's have more of that." In the Bible, we're encouraged to fight evil, to expose it and fight it. We're not in charge. God is in charge, but we do play a part, and we are not we don't have a king. We are the self-governing people. And if we relinquish that role, we kind of deserve what's coming to us. And maybe I deserve it, but I sure don't want that for my kids and grandkids.
Sean?
These are puppets that both work for the same people. They pick them ahead of time. They select them ahead of time. Do you understand that?
No, I don't understand that. I do think there is an elite that is very persuasive and influential at the top of both parties, and that's why the Tea Party arose to challenge the elites in the Republican Party, especially, and in some areas with the Democratic Party, and say we've had it. We're full up. But the Tea Party, instead of just hanging its head and going home, has gotten involved. They've made a huge difference in many races. They've elected actual conservatives to replace real wishy-washy people. I think that you don't give up. You keep fighting.
Thanks, Sean. Let's go next to Soldiers Grove. Priscilla, you're on the air.
Yes, I have two comments. The first one is a question. We used to live in the Chicago area, and when we moved from Chicago to Maywood, it was a suburb, about 10 minutes away, they kept our name back in Chicago. And I was wondering, is there any precautions or measures taken that take someone's name off after they move? Because we didn't, but we could have gone back to vote and voted in two places.
That's an excellent question. And the first answer is that most people, after they move, don't bother to go back and inform the states they've moved from that, hey, I shouldn't be on the rolls anymore. It's really up to the states. The successor to the Voting Rights Act, a congressional piece of legislation, actually instructs states to clean up their voter rolls every few years. But in between, there could be people easily voting twice. That is kind of scary. If you do move, you really should inform your local election office that you've moved.
Yeah,
it doesn't happen automatically.
The other comment that I had was when we did move to Maywood, there were a couple of years, and this was in the late 1980s and early 90s, my sister worked at the voting booth, at the voting polls, and she found that people were coming and claiming that they lived at an address that didn't exist. It was in between houses, and they got away with it. She tried protesting, and she got shouted down. And, I grew up in Chicago where they said vote early and vote often. I mean, I heard that all the time.
Yeah, well, in the 1974 mayoral election, there were 100,000 votes cast. They found out in a study later that were all illegal votes. I mean, Chicago kind of sets the standard for that. And in other cases, we've seen where in South Carolina, when they were checking voter rolls, they found that there were something like 30 names at one address, and they found out it was a college dorm. And a lot of these were out-of-state students. So, that you should encourage people in your own states to do the job, the election officials, to clean up the voter rolls, find out what they've done to do it. I would encourage people to back legislators who want to protect the vote by ensuring that you have photo ID when you vote. I think that's the most reasonable thing in the world. A poll just came out, and it showed that 71% of Latinos back photo ID. And they're the ones who are supposed to be discriminated against because of photo ID. We're told over and over again it's an anti-immigrant thing or it's anti-African American. But a majority in all segments of society backs photo ID because it's just common sense to prove who you are. You have to show you are who you say you are.
Priscilla, thanks for your call here today.
Thank you.
To Robert in Racine, you're on the air.
Yes, I know that I'm reading the book, and it referred to Moses giving orders for the children of Israel to go in. That would be the law because God would have commanded them, and then they formed a democratic add-on policy and said, well, we'll check out the land, and then they decided not to go in. Kind of like we're not going to vote because we're thinking it's two sides of evil, but I've been reading and seeing Apostle Paul's, well, Jesus said, if you only salute them that love you or salute them that are of your same faith, what reward have you? And Paul, in Romans, referred to the Gentiles doing that which is written in the law with not having the law. You know, the mode of the pattern, the better pattern, so I'm going to vote for the opposing side to the Democratic side. And I had a question. I've been listening, this is just curiosity or observation, a few more license plates from out-of-state states here in Wisconsin in the neighborhood driving, you know, in traffic, and I've been driving for 30-some years or 20-some years, and it seemed out of the ordinary at this point in time. And I wonder, like you just mentioned, how do they come in and do things and operate to help this? And I wondered, are other states voting ahead and then they're able to shuffle around and commence with this under-the-table voting operation?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, that because the states vary. I think Ohio started quite a while ago with absentee voting, that people could move around. Of course, some of these people may just be campaign workers, you know, not there to vote illegally, but just, you know, they're going from state to state organizing. And I remember in 2008 when we got hit with Obama canvassers several times. They were very thorough in our neighborhood. I haven't seen any this year yet, which makes me wonder whether the young people are as fired up as they were in 2008. I don't think they have as many volunteers. But yeah, that's an interesting observation, all those out-of-state plates. I hope it doesn't bode poorly.
Thank you, Robert, for your call. Jim in East Troy, you're on the air.
Yeah, Bob. I got two questions. Earlier you had mentioned a website where you could check on who can vote in your area.
Yeah, True the Vote.
What was that?
True the Vote. True. The Vote.
Okay. And I've always heard, you know, people tell me, well, I can't vote because I had been in jail for drunk driving or whatever. Who can't vote?
Who can't vote?
Yeah.
Well, convicted felons can't vote in most states. Some states have restored voting rights after a certain number of years. You can't vote if you are registered in another state. You can't vote if you're under 18. That's about it. If you're 18 years old and aren't a convicted felon, you should be able to vote.
Even if they're like on probation and stuff?
Good question. I don't know what the nuances are.
Yeah, there's so many people. I used to work in a correctional facility. There's so many people on probation. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, if they're convicted of a felony, they probably can't vote. If they're convicted of a misdemeanor, maybe they can.
Yeah.
Depends on where you are.
Yeah, right. I tell you what, let me just say this here, Jim, that the state of Wisconsin, which you're calling from, has established a new website that allows you to check out all those things, and some of these things do vary from state to state, but for you it would be myvote.wi.gov. And that's a very helpful site. You can even see a sample ballot and get a lot of the voter information, but that's myvote.wi.gov. You can even check out your own registration there, too, to make sure you're registered to vote, as well as to find your voting location, many other things. But most states have some kind of portal like that to provide that information for you here. Thank you for your call. Appreciate it.
They do, Jim, and if you don't mind my mentioning it, the protectyourvote.us website has that. We have a map.
Oh, great.
You click on it, and your state comes up, and it gives you the link to the election information, just like that.
Wonderful. That's protectyourvote.us. We're going to take a quick 60-second break and come back to more of your phone calls as we speak today with Robert Knight. You're listening to Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewweekend.com. When you call out publicly false teachers and false teaching, perhaps you have been told you're wrong in doing so. And the scripture that is cited is Matthew 18, that you're to go to them privately in person. Well, there's a problem. That is not using that scripture in context. Matthew 18 deals with church discipline. Matthew 18 deals with a private sin issue. not public false teaching. We see in 2 Timothy, Paul calls out publicly those who are teaching that which is not right, that which is not biblical. We are not to use Matthew 18 to silence those trying to correct public false teaching. After all, how do you privately correct public false teaching? You can't. You must publicly correct public false teaching. And that's why when someone uses Matthew 18 to you out of context, explain to them lovingly that is a private sin issue that deals with church discipline, not exposing false teachers.
Robert Knight is our guest here today on Crosstalk, and folks, check out the website that we've given several times here, protectyourvote.us, and you'll get a lot of information not only about your state, but what's happening nationally as well. Let's go right back to the phone lines. Our next caller is from Rome, Georgia, and Cecilia, you're on the air.
Hi, Vic. Hi, everybody. Yes, I was calling to recommend or suggest or ask if the Postal Service has ever been utilized as a resource to verify or cross-verify with addresses for voters. And the reason I say that, I work for them, but they offer a free service across the world for anyone that moves, the central forwarding system. So when anyone moves from an address, it's all provided they do put in a change of address. But even if they don't put in a change of address, carriers are responsible for notating and logging, and then it's recorded that they've either moved, left no forwarding address, something to that regard. But they're all schemes and recorded as such. So I was wondering, has there ever, are you aware of any thoughts that or possible programs that have utilized our service of the Postal Service?
Thank you, Celia.
You know, that would make perfect sense for states to be able to cross-check against the Postal Service records, but I'm not sure they talk to each other.
Yeah.
I don't think state election officials ask the post office to send them information about people who've moved on. It's probably a good idea if they did, but I'm not aware of that.
Thank you, Celia. To Florida, and Holly, you're on the air.
Yes. Thanks for taking my call. But I just have a question. I have some Christian friends that are coming up with a new person to vote for, right? But I've been told that if you vote for a third party, that it ends up splitting the vote between the, primary Republican and Democrat party. How does that work? I mean, not that I think a third party, I think you're throwing your vote away, but I just wanted your opinion.
Well, it doesn't split the vote. It denies one of the major parties your vote, and in a close election, that can make a huge difference. So people have to weigh whether they are more concerned with casting it for a person who more closely models their values, or the person they think should win, if only to deny the other person office. There are a lot of calculations that can go into casting your vote. For me, right now I think the choice is so stark and so obvious that I can tell you personally I wouldn't mess around. I would make sure that there are people in office that I don't want to see reelected, to tell you the truth.
Holly, thanks for your call. Here to Eldon in Twin Falls, Idaho. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you so much for your program. God bless you for the information. It's votesmart.org and protectyourvote.us, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to just totally bury folks, but do you know about Judicial Watch?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they're a wonderful organization. We work alongside them.
Oh, great, good, because Tom Fitt, they are fighting this voter registration thing in court and everything else. They're taking some of these states to court. So everybody should try to support them also. It's just simply judicialwatch.org.
Thank you so much. And, I know, Robert, that there are several organizations that are involved in this whole matter of Liberty Counsel and ACLJ and many others that are really trying to make a difference in this regard.
Well, there are. And Judicial Watch is one of the best ones. I know Tom Fitton personally, and he's a fine man, and He's aggressive. That's what I like about Judicial Watch. They don't sit back. They go ahead and file suit. They file Freedom of Information Act requests for anybody if they think the cause is worth it. And we keep close tabs with them, and I'm in meetings with them, and they're sort of the litigation arm of what we're doing. So recommend them highly.
Our next caller is from Silver Bay, Minnesota. Jesse, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I was just calling because on a video, I can't remember which video I saw, but either Fall of the Republic or Obama Deception by Alex Jones, and he had mentioned something about the voting machines being owned by these companies who put these machines together, or whatever, are owned by CIA. And I'm not sure, what's true about that or whatever. But I'm right away I think of Leon Panetta, who is the head of the CIA that Obama appointed. And I guess I was just wondering, how much of that's true, and who is putting those guys in check? Who is watching over those guys?
Okay. What about this, Bob? What about voting machines? Can we trust their integrity?
Well, I think by and large, yeah, although there have been some very disturbing rumors out there about where they're coming from and who's maintaining them. In fact, in Nevada, where Harry Reid is senator and won the last election over Sharon Engel, the SEIU, which is a far-left union formerly headed by Andy Stern, who has, I think, made more visits to the White House than just about anybody, they actually had the contract for servicing the machines. Which to me is like putting the fox in charge of the hen house. That's just one example. As far as the CIA thing, I don't know, frankly. I hadn't heard that one. I had heard that some company in Europe was actually providing some of the software for the voting machines, and that you're wondering what's the integrity of that company. That. A call to your own election officials isn't out of the question. Just call them and say, hey, where do our voting machines come from? Who maintains them? And that would make an interesting conversation, I think.
Yeah. Thanks for the call here, Jesse. And I apologize to other callers. We're just 20 seconds away from having to leave you. Robert Knight is our guest here today. Let me give you those final seconds, sir, Bob, if I could, just to sum up your thoughts for the day's broadcast.
Okay, I think self-government doesn't happen by itself. People have to get involved. This election is crucial. It may be the most crucial of our lifetimes. People have to get off the couch and get involved. If they know somebody they can help get off the couch, they ought to help them. Drive somebody to the polls. If they can't get there, help elderly people register or vote. This is too important to sit on the sideline.
Robert Knight has been our guest today from the American Civil Rights Union. You can check out the site, protectyourvote.us. Bob, thank you for being with us.
Jim, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And, folks, thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the Internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.